My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
And my name is Dr. What, and I'm a total nerd, but you wouldn't know it if you met me. My expertise is in mathematics, history, of course medicine, and all things nerddom.
Our mission is to bring nerd culture to the masses
by putting it all under the microscope. Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, TV, mega comic books, or is that graphic novels, cartoons, groups, that's animation, Disney, Star Wars, Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and Digimon, and Mighty Morphin, Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Nintendo, Cinematic Universes, Marvel, DC, Justice League, is Batman, Leagues with Superman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Avengers, Iron Man, Captain Tropas, Loki, Spider-Man, and Hulk and Logan, X-Men, Avengers, Alien, Galaxy, Guardians, Star Trek, Prick, Picard, and Janeway, Nerds and Geeks from gather around and join them in the Big Fat Shark.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd culture under the microscope. Sadly, Dr. What, who would be the ideal guest, frankly, for this topic, is away this week. Dr. What? Oh, I see what you're doing. Okay. So, yeah, Dr. What's away visiting family. So, in the circumstance we find ourselves, I'm left to search the pool of Bat Jar guests to find someone to be my guest this week. And I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to bring in somebody who was my first real exposure to Doctor Who, which is going to be the topic for today. So we welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, making his debut appearance, my good friend Pumice.
Hi. Nice to be on finally. Thanks for having me.
So Pumice, we used to live together.
Yeah.
We shared a room for a year. And
interesting year.
Yes, yeah. And before that, we were friends. And I remember I would go over to your house to watch The Flash because you had a means of watching live television, which I did not.
Yeah, you were just terrible at waiting. You had to watch it live.
It was exciting for me because The Flash was, that show started in 2014, if you can believe it. That's just indicative of how long we've known each other, but The Flash was the first TV show that I remember watching from the pilot and watching it weekly as it aired. Up until that point in 2014, I don't think I'd started watching a show from the pilot onwards since Desperate Housewives premiered in 2005.
I did not know you watched Desperate Housewives.
Just for the first season. I really wanted to find out who the murderer was.
Oh, okay.
But nonetheless, you allowed me, and you were there with me as I was experiencing The Flash for the first time.
Yeah, thinking back on it now, I can't believe that was the first season. So we've actually watched every season of The Flash together.
Well, I've cheated on you a bit this year with it being on Netflix.
How could you?
But we did Arrow this year.
We did do a lot of Arrow.
We and we would get together once every month and a half and just watch 4 episodes,
binge 4 or 5 episodes in a night.
Pretty intense. But nonetheless, you were, I think, my first exposure to Doctor Who. Many things we've discussed in the show before, I remember or I see ads, but I didn't really have any actual understanding of the lore or the franchise until I met you. And we're going to get more into your history with Doctor Who later. But for now, you're a new special guest, so even though I'm very familiar with you, our listeners have no idea who you are. So every time a new guest comes onto the show, we always ask them 2 questions. And these questions were first suggested by a listener named Rob Kakel. He sent us an email asking Asian John and myself these questions. And since he sent us that email for the first time, we've been using these same questions on every guest who comes on the show. Okay. So you are continuing the great tradition of everyone who comes on the show answering these 2 questions. So I hope you're ready for this.
Bring it on.
Question number 1. What kind of nerd or geek are you?
Now, I remember you have a system for this, but I'm not as super familiar with it.
Well, here, give your own unfiltered explanation of who you think you are, and then we'll tell you how you fit into our system.
I don't know. I'm kind of half nerd, half geek, if that's a thing. I used to be a lot more into a lot more things and know a lot about the backstories and all that sort of stuff. Read all the Star Wars EU novels before they were kicked out of canon and all that sort of stuff.
That's called Legends. Right?
Legends.
They're called Star Wars Legends now.
Oh, okay.
So if you go on Wikipedia, there's 2 tabs for everything. There's canon and then Legends.
Okay.
So you can click on the Legends tab if you
and
want to
get
see
all the old stuff
Yeah.
that was just Disney was just like, hey, we bought it. This stuff sucks. Cut it out of there. And then they gave Ryan Johnson the lead on a movie, and it just went. Pfft. But anyways, back to me. I don't know. I'm not like crazy into the geek or nerd topics that I'm into.
Give us some examples. Like, what are do you play video games, board games? Do you watch like movies? Are there genres, franchises? Like, what are the things that you are really attracted to?
Honestly, most of those things you just said. So I'm a board games fan. I love playing board games with friends. It's my go-tos in board games at least are more like quick play, easy to teach, so you can play with more people kind of a thing, where you won't lose interest because it's a 6-hour game kind of thing. As for video games, yeah, I play a few. It's a fun side thing. It's not something I do as much of anymore, as there's a lot
I wouldn't really call you a gamer.
Yeah, there's most of what I do is just like single player kind of puzzle games or adventure games kind of thing. It's just for fun. Like I'm by no means a good gamer. I just kind of play for fun. Movies. Honestly, I love movies. I watch a lot of movies and TV. There's not a lot of genres that I don't like actually. I'm a pretty easy person to please.
I'll be honest, you are notorious for giving out spoilers.
That is true.
While the movie is still playing. So if it's a movie you've seen before, you have no shame about announcing things that are going to happen.
It's something I've been trying to lessen.
Oh, that's good to hear.
But funny story, actually, in the past couple hours, I accidentally spoiled Top Gun for a couple of my roommates. Because I did not realize that neither of them had seen it before. I'm like, hey, is this before or after Goose dies? And one of them goes, Podrig, and the other one goes, Goose dies? So it turns out one of them hadn't seen it before.
All right, so based on who I know you to be, I would say you're more of a geek, because how the podcast has defined nerds and geeks is that nerds are really into the STEM subjects, science,
technology,
engineering, mathematics.
Yeah.
And that they typically will pursue more solitary interests. So you did mention single-player video games, but that's such a small part of what you do. You are much more the kind of guy who builds community, and if you're going to watch a show, you're going to like invite people over, or you're into board games that are social. So you are totally a geek.
Okay. Yeah, and
by how we choose on the show to define what a nerd and a geek is.
Okay. Yeah, and that's part of why I think I'm bad at spoilers, is because a lot of times I will watch stuff first to be like, hey, do I like this? Do I think these people that I watch it with will like it? I can have more informed recommendations, and then just knowing the storyline is a lot to keep in sometimes.
Now, what kind of nerd, or sorry, we've identified you're a geek. What kind of geek do you want to be?
Do I want to be? Honestly, I don't mind where I'm at. It's kind of, I'm not super into all this stuff. I use it as a, like you said, a community sort of a thing. So get together with my friends, and it's a form of quality time.
So for you, if you had more time, like you're a busy guy, but if you had more time, there's nothing you would invest in, like things you haven't gotten invested in yet, or maybe dedicating more time to things you are already invested in. There's nothing you would change about your current consumption of fan-based entertainment hobbies.
Well, the only thing I could think of would be I'm a fan of comic book movies and comic book TV shows. Would be learning some more of the background and lore of these worlds and these stories, because like you mentioned, we used to watch Flash and Arrow together, and you'd get a lot of the old comic book references in there, and caused a lot of very excited reactions, if I'm recalling correctly. At one point, we had to keep the doors to the living room closed because the other guys who lived in the house with us thought he was crazy.
I couldn't help it. I was so invested, and they always ended these episodes on cliffhangers.
Oh, the cliffhangers were the worst for you.
And they still do. It's still, you think by now, like Arrow's coming into its 8th and final season, you think by now I would be mentally prepared for this, that I would be aware of the fact that this is going to happen and I'm going to fall into this trap. But they get me every single time.
They do, which is pretty surprising, and it's still entertaining because you do have some good reactions to that. But I don't know.
It's entertaining for you then? Is
that's what I'm trying to say. Yes, it's more entertaining to watch for me. It's part of why I like watching the shows with you. Because the way I like to watch these shows is trying to guess what's going to happen next, and guessing the cliffhangers is a lot easier, especially when a show like Arrow's been going on for 8 seasons. After the first 4, you can kind of look at what's happened before and be like, okay, this is going to happen now. He's not going to die. He's a main character.
Yeah. So nonetheless, Pumice, it's great to have you on the show. I look forward to having this conversation with you. But we're going to do something different. We're actually going to go straight to looking into the bat jar for our mail. So if you can open up the bat jar for us, we're going to...
That's right, folks. It's a Benjamin Button episode.
That's a reference to a movie that came out. So this week we have an email from our friend Dr. What. So even though he can't be here with us, he's still sending us mail. So Pumice, I'm going to have you read this email for us. So we already know it's from Dr. What, but maybe if you could read the subject line for us and then the content of the email.
Alrighty, so we got an email from Dr. What, and the subject line is Worst Christmas Special Ever. Dear friends, what do you say we do an episode this year in December on the worst Christmas special ever, the Star Wars Christmas special? It's truly terrible. Let me know what you think. Dr. What?
So Pumice, have you seen the Star Wars Christmas special?
I have seen very limited bits of it. I believe it was the scene where Leia is standing at the base of a tree singing.
That's impossible because there's no way you could have seen the Star Wars Christmas special. Do you want to know why?
Why?
Because there is no Star Wars Christmas special.
Oh, it's a holiday special?
There is a Star Wars holiday special.
Oh, my goodness.
Because it turns out, in a galaxy far, far away, there is no Jesus Christ, but there is this Wookiee holiday called Life Day.
Okay.
So, of course, you can't have Christmas without Jesus Christ. And it seems that in the galaxy far, far away, there is no Jesus, or they haven't discovered Jesus or whatever. Point is, there's no Christmas. So they indeed have a holiday special. And you say you've seen one clip from this thing?
Yeah, if I'm informed correctly, it's a good hour long at least, isn't it?
Yeah, so I have a funny story about this holiday special. When I was in high school, I had one teacher who was he was super into Lord of the Rings, and I was going through my I think I always said Star Wars was better than Lord of the Rings.
Really?
Yeah, and I still personally enjoy, to this day, I still personally enjoy Star Wars more than Lord of the Rings, and I know...
we still managed to be friends somehow.
Yeah, and I know all you Lord of the Rings people are going to be like, oh, there's so much in Lord of the Rings, books came out, and we wouldn't have Star Wars without Lord of the Rings. Point is, I enjoy Star Wars more than Lord of the Rings. Please don't kill me.
Oh, I'm not. That's perfectly fine. It's your personal preference in the geek and nerddom.
Thank you.
I do enjoy Star Wars, but just personal preference, I do prefer Lord of the Rings.
So this history teacher always argued with me about how Star Wars was not as good as Lord of the Rings. And one day in the middle of a class, he pulled up on YouTube the Star Wars holiday special, and he used that as evidence. He played it for the whole class. He's like, this is Star Wars. How can you say this is better than Lord of the Rings?
Now, if only it had been 6 or 7 years later, you could have showed him The Hobbit and been like, your point?
Yeah, and the clip, we sat there for 8 minutes, and it's an 8-minute segment where the only characters on screen are Wookiees. Okay?
Oh,
and
boy.
These Wookiees, how does Chewbacca talk in the Star Wars movies?
He sounds like a wooden chair squeaking on a floor. That sounds more like Yoda, but okay.
Well, anyway, you know what I mean. He growls and makes inaudible sounds, and we're meant to intuit what he is saying based on how the other, English-speaking characters are talking to him. Well, this is a scene where there's 4 Wookiee characters, okay? And they are just growling at each other. They're talking to each other, but they're doing their growling, and there's no subtitles. So you have no clue what anyone is saying, and it's quite literally there's a mom Wookiee and a grandpa Wookiee and a little kid Wookiee, and they're literally just they're just talking back and forth.
It's just noise.
It's just noise, and you're sitting there what is first of all, you're just I don't know what's going on here. It just sounds like a bunch of nonsense, and then it gets boring really fast because you're I have no way to connect to these characters. There's no. And I don't know why they thought this was a good idea, but that's just one example.
Yeah. So I could not remember it, so I just had to look it up here. But the Wookiee language is actually called Shurwook. Shhyrii Wook. It's the made-up name for it.
Okay.
And it is an official language in the world of Star Wars. And if you ever read as they're called now, as I learned today, Legends books, it was still a very difficult language to understand because they always wrote it in brackets with no spaces between the words. So you could have a Wookiee say a full-on sentence, and it would just be like 2 lines of words, and you're like, where the heck are all the spaces?
So all I have to say, I have not watched the Star Wars Holiday Special in its entirety. I have watched that 8 minutes, and it was a very, very painful 8 minutes. I have watched the Nostalgia Critic do his review of the Star Wars Holiday Special, and his review is like 25 minutes long, and even that was painful to sit through because he highlights all of the worst parts of it and how awful it is. So certainly, Dr. What, if you want to get me the Christmas present of a terrible time that will certainly like make me suffer in many ways, then why not? Let's do the Star Wars Holiday Special this Christmas. Pumice, does that sound like something you'd be interested in?
I would honestly be interested in that. As we've established, I appreciate watching you watch things. And I feel like this would be very entertaining, watching something this painful.
I think I'll just get so angry. I might literally just yell into the mic for an hour.
We'll just put one of those like safety screens around your TV so you can't throw anything at it.
Yeah, that'd be nice. The closest I've ever gotten to actually throwing something at my TV is like I was playing a video game when I got so angry I literally threw my controller on the ground. But that's as close as I've ever gotten to actually throwing something at the TV.
Back in the early 2000s, I think it was early 2000s? Maybe later 2000s. There were Nerf actually for a while manufactured game controllers with the Nerf padding all around it.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Specifically for people who like to throw their controllers when they got angry.
Surprisingly, even though I did chuck that thing on the ground, it didn't break.
They are surprising. Well, the older ones probably.
Yeah, probably not these new ones, but
I've dropped one of the new ones now, and it's like, oh, now the button always goes. Now you're always walking backwards, which is very difficult to play games with.
Anyway, Dr. What, yes, I think it's a good idea for us to take a look at the Star Wars Holiday Special this Christmas. So look forward to that one, folks. Come December, we're 3 months away. You got time to prepare yourselves mentally, emotionally, spiritually for this experience. It's going to be a rough one.
Bring your plugs and possibly dark glasses.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. What, for the email. If you have enjoyed hearing us talk about this potential episode topic and you would like to ask us questions, you have ideas, please, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to get your mail. Pumice, could you please tell the people how they can get a hold of us?
If you want to contact the show with a question or an idea for an episode, you can send us an email to
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or, if you prefer the tweetosphere, you can send us a tweet at
@thebatcookiejar. So, Pumice, as I mentioned, you were the first person I ever met who was like an actual Whovian. That's the word to describe a Doctor Who fan, right? A Whovian.
That is the technical term. I don't know if I would identify as a full-out Whovian.
What's a partial Whovian called?
It's the term for the show's fans. You just, like most fandoms, there are varying levels of
commitment.
Yes, that's
okay.
Like, I have cosplayed as the Doctor a couple of times, but like I've never been to a Comic-Con dressed as the Doctor, kind of a thing.
Right. Okay, so fine then. We'll say you were the first Doctor Who fan I was ever a friend with.
Okay.
That I can remember. Anyone from my life who knew me before Pumice, who was a Doctor Who fan, I apologize. But Pumice certainly left the greatest impact on me. And I'm curious, like, what led you? How did you first encounter Doctor Who, and what made you a fan of the show?
To be perfectly honest, I was browsing on Netflix and super bored, and was like, "Hey, this looks interesting." There's like galaxies on the thumbnail. And I clicked it, and it was the, I forget what, 2012 maybe was when I started watching it. And I started Netflix. I don't remember if it had the classic Who at the time, but I started with the revamping that started in 2005, where they brought it back, and I really enjoyed the storylines. It was the 9th Doctor at the time, and to this day he is one of my top 2. Well, he's my second favorite Doctor now, because he was just. There was cool storylines. I'd never seen storytelling like that before. Sorry, I'm off mic. I hadn't seen a story, that sort of a sci-fi story told before, where like this is this cool ship that traveled through space and time, and this guy is using it to help people. And I think one of the first it was the first episode. The first episode when they revamped it in 2005. He was fighting an army of living mannequins who somehow grew machine guns in their arms, and I was just like, this is just so out of nowhere. I like it. Let's keep watching.
So you started in 2012, and you basically watched everything that was on Netflix at the time, and then you started following the show as it was airing?
Yep, that's basically how it happened. Watched everything that was on there. I once I caught up, I was watching it live when it came out. What year was the 50th? I don't remember now.
It started airing in 1963, so
2013?
Yeah.
Because I remember that. They came out with the 50th anniversary special, and it was airing in theaters out near where I lived at the time, and I went with a friend of mine who was also a giant Whovian, and it was a really fun storyline, because that was the one where they had, I'm trying to remember now. That's the episode where they brought together Doctors 10, 11, and War Doctor. They call him the War Doctor. He's kind of 8.5. They don't really give him a number because he's the one who like ended the war and did this horrible atrocity, at least to himself. That's how he saw it, kind of thing. But it was a really cool storyline. It was cool to go see this in theaters, and like, this is this niche show that at that point I didn't realize how many people were fans of. And I was like, this is just a show that I kind of like, and I watch it and talk to my friend about it. And we went to a movie theater, sat down and watched this big 50th anniversary special, and the theater was packed. There was like people dressed as the Doctor. One guy, I remember it was the first time I'd ever seen someone in pajamas in a movie theater. He was dressed, he had TARDIS pajamas on, and I'm like, wow, there's people who are way more into this show than I am.
So, like I said, you were my introduction to Doctor Who. So if you hadn't been on Netflix in 2012, you wouldn't have become a fan, and you wouldn't have had Doctor Who posters in your room or your sonic screwdriver on your desk, and I would have never inquired more about what Doctor Who was, and so we might not be here today. So
that's true.
Netflix, you've clearly you're kind of on your way out the door now, in my opinion, but you have done a lot of work to build fans, so well done. So you used a lot of words there to describe the kind of the lore of Doctor Who that we're going to explain for people a bit here. So the topic for today's episode is Classic Who versus New Who. Now, what do we mean by this?
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
New
Who. Oh, I should have seen that coming. So Doctor Who is a British science fiction television series. It began airing in 1963, and it aired continuously until 1989. So it went on for 26 years?
I'm not good at quick math.
Neither am I.
I'll go with 26 years.
Yeah, we'll say 26 years. So it aired continuously for 26 years, and I think the brilliant story writing decision they made, like somebody who came up with this idea deserves a raise, because essentially, you know, the I guess the basic premise of Doctor Who is that you have this character who's a Time Lord.
Yeah. So there's an alien race from the planet Gallifrey. They're supposed to be like guardians of space-time. They go around traveling through space and time in their magic spaceships.
So is it actually magic, or is it just like it's technology that seems like magic?
Magic is science that hasn't been explained yet. So
is that a Doctor Who quote, or is that like a quote from something else?
It might have, honestly, it's been going for over 50 years. It might have been used at some point, but I don't believe I heard it originally from Doctor Who.
Because it is, like, that's certainly a trope in sci-fi. You see a lot of alien races that use what seems like magic to us because we can't explain how it works. even like the Green Lantern ring, like the way that thing works, it seems like magic because we can't explain it and they write it in, it's like, oh, it's advanced alien technology.
Willpower.
Yeah. So would you say that like the Doctor Who's technology and his weapons and whatnot is kind of like that?
It seems that way. They try to explain it a little bit. Their sort of explanation, or at least the top high level explanation, is these advanced aliens have figured out a way to basically manipulate dimensions. So their spaceships are very small, but they're bigger on the inside. That's anyone who watches Doctor Who will get that reference if you just say it's bigger on the inside. Because at least the Doctor that we follow in the show, his TARDIS is disguised as a 1900s police box, which is just this iconic blue box that Doctor Who has made.
From what I
Really
understand,
famous.
it's basically like, these things existed in Britain as a way for people to call the police.
Yep, so there'd be a phone in the door of this box if somebody needed to call the police, like if you found a drunk person in the park or something. You could basically just get them into this box, close the box, call the police, being like, hey, there's someone in this police box. You need to come pick them up.
Before cell phones, folks, this is what we had.
Yeah, it's kind of like a telephone booth, but the telephone's on the outside and the door can be closed and locked.
So I guess you've probably heard the word TARDIS before. That is the name of the Doctor's spaceship?
Well, technically not just the Doctors. All of the Time Lord spaceships are called TARDISes. So
Oh, okay.
TARDIS. It stands for Time and Relative Dimension in Space,
Oh.
which that's their whole dimensional manipulation thing is relative dimension. So this small spaceship, the size of like a phone booth kind of thing, once you open the doors and go inside, it's this giant ship.
So if he's called the Doctor, if he's an alien, I should say, why is he called the Doctor? Or do they have medical degrees or psychological doctorates on his home planet?
So he doesn't actually have a PhD. The way that so Time Lords don't actually use their real names. I don't remember exactly in the lore, but it's something to do with once they grow up to a certain age, they choose a name for themselves. And for him, he was just like, he wanted to help people, so he's like, hey, doctors help people. I'm going to be the Doctor. That's at least how I remember it. I might be misremembering, but that's basically how I remember them choosing their names.
And is Time Lord, is that like an occupation or is that like their race? Like what is a Time Lord?
So Time Lords is kind of the alien race.
Wow. Quite a self-important race, these people. They're like, we're the Lords of Time. Ooh.
We're Time Lords, guys.
So I don't understand. Why are these beings, are they just like higher level beings? Are they like deities or something? Why are they the ones who get to just be the Lords of Time?
They can travel through time and they're supposed to like help people, but they're also not. There's in one of the, I believe it was the second series from the reboot, you get with the 10th Doctor. There's a couple storylines where he's not supposed to manipulate time and like use it to his advantage, but he kind of struggles with that power, being like, hey, the laws of time are mine. I can do what I want with this. That's kind of their struggle. Is like they're very powerful beings, and he as the Doctor is trying to help people, but then you get his nemesis, the Master, who's kind of trying to do the opposite. And
Now, do Time Lords have like any enhanced abilities? Like, do they have superpowers at all?
well, I mean, not in the traditional like comic book superhero kind of thing. They have 2 hearts, which is a unique thing about them, I guess.
And so they're like cows. Well, cows have multiple stomachs, but
well, I mean, you're on multiple organs, but not quite the same thing, I guess. But yeah, so they have two hearts. So there's actually the double heartbeat that they have that comes back in a storyline in the classic Who. That's it's like, can you hear the drums? That was the whole thing. Anyways, it's a long storyline to try and explain, but basically they have 2 hearts, so they have this double heartbeat, and then they have what is the kind of the gimmick that they were given when the show started, and it's actually clever because it lets them kind of swap out actors.
yeah, this is what I was getting to before we got to describing the character. But go ahead, continue.
Sorry. So the Time Lord's ability is basically whenever they're like mortally wounded or going to die, as we would die, like if they got shot or something like that, they do what's called regeneration. So they basically just, regenerate into a different body, same sort of personality. There's some memory issues when they first come up and they're like, hey, I don't remember where I am, I don't remember this. And then they just kind of get used to this new body. And I believe it's 12 regenerations is standard for a Time Lord. That used to be the thing, where it was only 12, and then in the series...
They basically, when they got to the 12th regeneration, they invented a story mechanism so that they could continue the show.
Yeah, they invented this mechanism where the rest of the Time Lords were like, oh, you know what? We can totally gift you more regenerations.
So yes, this is a storytelling tool that I think is, if Doctor Who is remembered for anything else, it'll be remembered for this, when, in the history of the universe, because what this allowed them to do was to continue the same show but changing the lead actor, because every TV show that I've followed faithfully, sometimes shows get canceled or end because the main character, the main actor, doesn't want to keep being part of the same show. And, if you look at a show like Smallville, like from the first season to the last season, the main cast changed tremendously because actors decide to move on to other projects. The only actor who really can't move on to another project is the main character. If that main character leaves the show, it's like, then it's not the same show anymore.
Exactly.
So that lead actor really carries a lot of weight with them. It's kind of up to them in a way that if the show continues or not. I think the only TV series I've ever heard of where the main character left the show was That 70s Show, when Topher Grace decided to leave that TV series.
And that was just a weird series.
I guess Michael Scott with Steve Carell, he left
Steve
the
Carell
office
leaving
as
the
well.
office.
But, and those are two examples where the shows just weren't the same after that lead person left. So there's always a lot of weight put on the lead actor of one of these shows to keep doing it. And in the case of Doctor Who, the first Doctor, as he's referred to, basically because the Doctor regenerates, the actor who portrays Doctor Who is referred to by their number, by like what number in the series of Doctors they are. So William Hartnell was the first Doctor, which means he was the first person to play the Doctor, and then every actor who succeeded him was either the second, third, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently what happened with William Hartnell, he was an older man when they started the show, and by the time they were into like their second or third year with him, he was really suffering from dementia. He had reached a point where he was suffering memory loss, and he was flubbing his lines, and it was unfortunate. It's an unfortunate thing that happens when people age, right? They're not the same person they were when they started, and it's hard for them to continue working full time, especially in a job like acting where it revolves around memorizing lines. So the writers of Doctor Who came up with this mechanism where basically they could replace the main actor and the show could continue on because the show was successful.
It also let them, because they brought in a different actor, they could like change the personality a little bit here and there and try different things.
And that's the other part of it that's genius, is they've written into the canon of the show that when the Doctor regenerates, his personality can change.
Yeah,
that
he's a different person. They could be anything. There was a running joke for a while that he always wanted to be a ginger.
A ginger? Like
yeah,
a redhead?
Like, maybe I'll be a ginger next time.
And I think that's so brilliant because certainly if you think of someone like James Bond or even Batman, every time a new actor steps into the role, they are trying to, make their own mark while at the same time being similar to the people who came before them. But the way that they wrote this regeneration thing into Doctor Who is that allowed each actor who came in to do something different. Like they weren't stuck trying to do a impression of the guy who was there previously.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a premise that worked for the show. They cycled through 7 actors who played Doctor Who from 1963 all the way up until 1989. And that was the point when they decided to cancel the show because I guess they decided that it wasn't successful anymore. And to be frank, like that's a 26-year run. It's
a pretty darn good run for a TV show.
Yeah, I would say so.
Especially if you've seen some of the older, like the classic Who episodes. It's surprising that it was as popular as it was.
Yeah, and so we're going to get into that a bit more. All that to say, that means that the show ended in 1989, and then in the mid-1990s, an American-produced TV movie came out that was meant to be like a revival of Doctor Who.
Yeah, that was Doctor
Was that-
7 turned into Doctor 8 during the movie.
That's right. So the 8th Doctor is unique, I guess, because he only appeared in one TV movie, whereas every other Doctor had at least one season of a TV show to have the screen time and have the role. And then in 2005, the BBC decided to bring back Doctor Who, and because the lore had already essentially been set up for a reboot in a way, they just basically had this new actor explained as like the newest incarnation of the Doctor, and they just went on their merry way. And, you know, that was in 2005, and as of 2019, they have continued on. They're up to the 13th Doctor now. And so our conversation today is really getting into how classic Who, in other words, the original run of the show from the 60s to the 80s, is different from this current run of the show, which has aired from 2005 till now.
Spoiler alert, the biggest difference is special effects.
If you had to take a guess as to how many episodes there have been of Doctor Who over this now 56-year history, what would you say?
I actually wouldn't have a good guess. I'm sure Dr. What would have a better guess, as I'm merely his
Would you say there's more than 500?
Oh, definitely.
Would you say there's less than 1,000?
50 years.
Now, bear in mind, they weren't airing, you know, they talk about Doctor Who having had over 50 years, but really there's a good almost 15 years where in the middle
There was
there,
nothing,
where
yeah.
there was nothing.
Well, the series on average had like 10 episodes each, usually. I don't know. I feel like it's got to be closer to 1,000.
Yeah, so as of this day, there's been as of the recording of this episode, there have been 851 episodes of Doctor Who.
Okay. So pretty close to 1,000.
Yeah, it's getting there. So this is going to be fun for me because I had a chance to sit down with our friend One Shot,
Okay.
and I kind of asked him. He's kind of similar to you in that he's only really experienced New Who, but I was with some other people. I had a chance to sit down with One Shot and some other people who were fans of Classic Who, and they kind of helped me come up with a list of ways in which Classic Who is different from New Who. And it's like, why even have this conversation? What's the point? Is because there actually are fans of Classic Who.
And fans of New Who.
Yeah, and I think there's not a whole lot of people who actually love both.
Yeah. See, me in particular, I'm more of a fan of New Who. I've tried to watch some of the Classic Who, but it's a lot harder to get through, especially if you've watched the New Who. At least one of the big things for me was going back to watch this TV show that was made in the 60s after seeing a show that was made in like 2005, 2006 with the more modern special effects and things like that. Going back to seeing, oh, these robots are made out of air conditioning vents, and it was just very different.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. That's difference number one. And this is kind of a lazy kind of catch-all difference, but it's like everything that has changed in television. So naturally, yes, if you go back and watch TV shows in the early 1960s, what they had in terms of camera quality, visual effects, and we're not talking about like CGI, obviously. This is like literally practical effects of building things out of wood and metal and plastic and creature costumes that are literally like, you know, obvious animal heads. You know, we've watched this 1960s Batman show together, and that show, part of the humor for us watching that show is how cheesy and silly all the practical effects look.
Like that, the guy who can shoot an arrow around a corner kind of thing.
Yeah, and you can tell it's on a string.
Yeah.
And frankly, Classic Who is a product of its time in terms of how the show looks. Like the first couple seasons, I believe, were in black and white, which at the time was still common for television. So certainly the complexity of the storytelling and the way the show was shot and just the advances that have been made in like editing of television, like especially for a science fiction kind of adventure show like this, I find that the modern Doctor Who and just really every TV show that's made nowadays has a much more rapid pace because it's meant to incite excitement in the viewer and get you really invested in what's going on. Whereas Classic Who plays out like a lot of older television shows where it's just kind of like the camera's in one position and it's as if they're like doing a stage play or something. and maybe we're lucky the camera will cut from one point of view to another, but that's pretty much it. And so I guess maybe we're just spoiled.
That's part of it, I would think.
Because we're so used to like modern storytelling that like it's harder for us to enjoy something that has like a slower, older mentality.
Like I do like some older TV shows, but I don't know. It would be hard to say whether if I'd started on Classic Who, I probably would have appreciated it differently because I hadn't been, as you say, spoiled by this new Doctor Who.
And to be honest, like the clips I have seen from Classic Who, and I see the cheesy special effects, it actually like makes me laugh. Like it helps, and not to like mock the people who were involved, but it helps me enjoy the show because I can acknowledge like even for the time this would have been goofy. And I'm the kind of guy, I love things that are silly and goofy, so it's very easy for me to enjoy. I don't need to suspend my disbelief to imagine that this is some great piece of media or that this is like the greatest practical effect of 1963. If I can see what they're trying to imagine, and it must have been hard for them to like put on these weird, like I think there's one creature in Classic Who where quite literally it's a person wrapped in bubble wrap and then they got something else on their head.
Yeah.
And I guess it's meant to
they
like
had very creative costumes.
It was like meant to evoke the feeling of like plastic wrap or like an octopus.
Oh.
Like those little suction cuppy things that are all over those things. So yeah, I think that's the obvious difference when you're talking about comparing this TV show that ran through the 60s and the 80s and the modern one, is that the newer show just has the advantage of modern technology, modern filmmaking techniques, and frankly, the other way New Who really benefits, and you might think this actually isn't a benefit, but New Who benefits from having showrunners and writers and producers that grew up as fans of the original and grew up through like Star Wars and Star Trek and all these other sci-fi properties that have become so prolific. People who work on the New Who series are fans of Doctor Who.
Yeah, so then they have, as you're saying, a lot more experience. They kind of know what works in the industry of sci-fi TV shows, because it's much less of a niche market as in 1963.
So for yourself, would you say that's been the biggest barrier to getting into Classic Who, is the fact that it is so dated?
It is very dated. It's, as you mentioned, pacing too. It's a lot slower. I eventually would like to get through all of it, just because I don't want to discount it as saying I don't like this, even though I haven't really seen all of it.
Apparently there's like almost 100 episodes that are missing.
Something like that.
So if you do try and track down Classic Who, there's certain lots of episodes you wouldn't even have to worry about getting through.
True, but the other thing too with Doctor Who is, especially in the newer Who, some of the really complicated storylines that they threw together, you can't really like skip chunks out of, or you'll be more confused.
Well, that's a good way to bring into our next huge difference, storytelling. I know we kind of just talked about everything involved with TV, but specifically with storytelling, a big part of Classic Who is that you had storylines, little mini story arcs, if you will, that would go from like 4 to 6 episodes. And so they were kind of like, they called them like stories. So the idea is that, first of all, the shows were only 25 minutes long, like a regular half-hour TV show. And so you would get not like a season-long story arc, but you would get like these little, I guess you could call them mini-series almost, where it's like the Doctor would go on these short-term adventures that would have multiple parts. Kind of like the movie serials we've spoken about in the podcast recently. And with the New Who, from what I understand, is that it's more of a season-long serialized storytelling structure.
A lot of them are that. It's sort of a longer story that happens over more episodes. Lets them do some more cliffhanger type things.
Oh, I just love them cliffhangers.
Oh yeah, I know you do.
Now, is that something you enjoy about New Who? Is that it has these season-long story arcs?
It is nice because I find at least you don't get rushed stories as often. Whereas if you're trying to tell a story over like 4 episodes, trying to fit in all the information you want.
See, that's interesting because you literally just made a comment about how New Who makes it hard for you if you miss some episodes, you've missed a bunch of the story. Mm-hmm. But you would still prefer that than like the shorter 4 to 6 episode arcs.
I don't know. I do recall some parts of the stories where there'd be a over 2 episode kind of thing. There'd be a cliffhanger, then the next episode. Actually, I think it was the 10th Doctor. A lot of his storylines, at least in his first series, were like 2 episodes. You'd be like, you start the episode, you get the payoff. And the second episode, you'd end it on a cliffhanger in 1 episode and only have to wait 1 more episode to find out how the whole story wraps up. And I found it well paced with that, because they weren't trying to cram too much story into it.
The episodes are a lot longer in the new
That's
season
true, too.
series, right?
Yeah, and in the past few series, the gaps between them have been getting a lot longer as well.
You mean
So-
gaps between like off seasons, if you will?
Yeah, off seasons.
Because since it's a British TV series, it doesn't really follow the same kind of programming schedule as like American television.
Mm-hmm. It's not on like Sherlock level yet. That's a running joke that
Are they still making Sherlock?
I believe so, but it's one of those shows where there's just a really long time between episodes.
Fair enough.
Like I don't remember what the gap was between the last special they released and the last season before it, but
So for you, the serialized kind of season-long story, you mentioned these like 2-parters. Can I just sit down and watch a random episode and get like a story beginning to end, or that then plays into like the series-long arc, or is it literally like, here's part 5 of our 13-part story?
with the storylines they have a lot of the time, at least I found it'd be hard for you to just kind of sit down and watch one. If you watched a couple episodes, you'd kind of have a good idea what's going on. But a lot of what I found that they did with the new Who, especially in upper seasons, like when you got into like the 12th and 11th and 12th Doctors, a lot of the storylines, they sort of build on what's happened in other Doctor storylines since the reboot in 2005. So there's a lot of like characters and back things they assume that you know. So having someone new just pop in and start watching it can be very confusing. And this I remember from firsthand experience. I tried introducing a friend of mine to it, and they wanted to start with Dr. 11, or the handsome doctor as they called him. And even starting at the beginning of Dr. 11, they still got pretty confused because of...
I've seen the first episode of the 11th Doctor, and I agree that
it can be very confusing, especially if you don't know all the backstory, at least have a basic.
Even to find it like the first episode of the 11th Doctor series, it kind of throws you in the middle of how the previous Doctor's adventures ended, and I had to have the people be like, okay, what's going on? Because there's not telling me anything. So yeah, that's all good and dandy. I think I would actually in this case give an edge to Classic Who, because I'm at a point where I'm watching so many shows that are serialized and it's like every episode matters, that it would be nice to have something that's more of an anthology series that's like, I'm not so concerned about building towards this series, this season finale.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I could just
sort of like your Black Mirror type of show where it's like you can watch an individual episode and you're perfectly fine with just one random episode.
Exactly. All right, difference number 3, romance. Now, apparently in the Classic Who, there was kind of like a mantra for the series, there's no kissing in the Tardis. And many fans or people believed the Doctor was asexual because he, throughout all his adventures traveling with men and women of various ages and whatnot, and that he never seemed to show any interest in characters, and there were no romances going on with other characters. But in New Who, that's romance is part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Whether the Doctor himself is the subject of someone else's infatuation, or if the Doctor is in love with somebody, or if there's companions. I guess we should explain companions. What's a companion?
So the Doctor never, or very rarely, travels alone. He usually travels with a companion who helps him out in his adventures. One thing I do like from the Classic Who, though, is I forget her name, but she had a robotic dog, K9, that was also one of the companion crew, if you will. And they brought him back for a throwback episode in the 10th Doctor's run. So they do a lot of homage to the old Who in the new Who.
Well, that's nice. But getting to romance, is it true that romance is part of all the stories in New Who?
A lot of them, yes. With the 9th Doctor, when they first came back from the reboot, it was kind of a very slow thing where, at least in the timeline of the show, well, I don't know. Do we have time to talk about the Time War and kind of
No.
No.
For simplicity's sake, that'll be another day, another conversation.
Yeah, it's a long story, but the TLDR of it is between Doctors 8 and 9, there was the War Doctor, and he believes he just killed his entire race. So Doctor 9 he's just come out of this massive thing. He believes he's killed his entire race, and he's this horribly guilty person.
PTSD, basically.
Yeah, sort of like that. And the first series, well, he was only around for one series, is kind of him getting back. He's still saving people, and he's starting to like...
Where's the romance come into this?
The romance into this is he meets a girl in the first episode. She becomes his companion for this series. And then as the series goes, he kind of... You see him develop more of those feelings for her.
Oh.
But he doesn't really act on them because he's still in that sort of PTSD state. And he's trying to do his thing and sort of atone for what he thinks he's done. And then in the 10th Doctor is where I would say the romance kind of really hits in the New Who, is when he just regenerates. He's all this new confident guy. He's kind of forgotten a lot of his past stuff. And
now for you, as a fan of New Who, does the romance make this story better, or like hearing that Classic Who didn't really have any romance in it at all, does that like excite you, or like how do you like? Maybe this is a personal preference thing, like, but I'm just curious.
Personally, I don't think it really. It doesn't really do a huge benefit. It also wouldn't be a like I can take it or leave it kind of a thing, where it's part of how they've written it. It works for the most part. Having that sort of romantic connection is just a different sort of motivation for him to help these people, his companions and whatnot.
Because like romance, it's a part of life, and it's a very easy way for us to try and connect to the characters emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
But I find the problem with so many TV shows is that when you try and do a romance story, it just feels so melodramatic or like a soap opera, and you try to create drama and love triangles and all these things that it's just like it's so cliche at this point.
They didn't have too many cliche stuff, if I'm recalling correctly.
Okay, so overall, you would say Doctor Who's better with romance or without? You said take it or leave it, but if you had to pick one,
I don't know. I'm still kind of on the fence on that. Like some of the Doctors, yes, I think they did a little too much with it. Some of them, it was okay. It was well done.
Do you agree with the sentiment? There's no kissing on the TARDIS.
I do like that, having that.
Okay,
like,
that's
keep
another
it off the TARDIS kind of.
That's another edge to Classic Who in this sense.
Part of it too is in the canon of the show, he's also very, very old, because as Time Lords of this alien race, they don't really age the same way that humans do. And then when they do get, about to die, they regenerate. So he's a very old person, and then him having romantic connections with these like humans who are hundreds of years younger than him is a little bit weird if you really think about it.
All right, comparison number 4, companions. So we spoke about these side characters briefly. Now, these are basically the other main cast members of the show, because the setting changes frequently because they're doing time travel.
Mm-hmm.
Does the companion change, or companions change with every Doctor?
Not always. At least in New Who. For instance, Rose Tyler was the first companion they brought in the reboot. She was around for Doctor 9 and most of 10. And they kind of switched companions in 10. So it's not just like one Doctor has one companion.
Okay.
So they have that element of, this companion got really close with this Doctor. Then he regenerates and like, this is a completely new person.
So apparently in New Who, companions have their own agency. They have storylines that are dedicated to them. They have their own story arcs.
Yeah, from what I've experienced of Classic Who, I would say that's pretty accurate. They have...
No, sorry, I said New Who's like that. Classic Who, companions are basically used to be a point of view character.
Yeah.
They're basically used as like a Watson or a Robin character, where there's someone for the Doctor to talk to and for the Doctor to sound smart.
Yeah, exactly. So in the New Who, they have more stories about them. They flesh out the characters a bit more, versus from my experience of Classic, they're supporting characters for the Doctor. They're always there, like you said, to make him sound smart.
And I'm assuming you're going to say you prefer the new Who.
I do prefer it in that regard.
Because it seems to me, again, not being a Whovian and being just connected to people like you in One Shot, it seems to me like some of your favorite characters are the companions and not the doctors themselves.
There were some very good companions. There's actually not the current Doctor, but the previous Doctor.
The 12th Doctor?
12th Doctor, yes, thank you. My numbers not working. But with the 12th Doctor, the companion that was actually one of the longest running companions of the show was with the 11th and 12th Doctor. And at the end of the 12th, well, not the end, almost the end of the 12th Doctor's run, they kind of set it up as this could be a spin-off show because the companion realizes that she's like hindering his work, and he's so... It's not a romantic connection they have, like we were talking about earlier. It's more like he's so loyal to her, he would literally, he almost ends the universe trying to save her. So she's like, I need to actually like leave. So they do, rather than just being there to support the Doctor, they do have a lot more of their own motivations and storylines.
So there we go. I think this is no debate. This is obviously something that's better in New Who.
Yeah, they develop the characters a lot more and flesh them out a bit.
Which you could argue is a compliment to the storytelling, but it's a difference enough will make its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the final big difference between Classic Who and New Who is the relationship with the Time Lords. Now, I guess this is a point where we have to talk about that
Time War a little bit.
Time War thing, because in the Classic Who, apparently the Doctor was on with talking to the other Time Lords on a regular basis.
Yeah, there was a lot more interaction with the other Time Lords.
As if he was just like calling home or touching base with his colleagues. And that was just a nature of the show. And like they were other characters, they talked to each other. But then in New Who, you kind of mentioned this whole Time War thing. Between, I guess, after the 8th Doctor, which was the TV movie Doctor, after him, but before the 2005 series, and the 9th Doctor, there's... What is it called? The Time War?
The Time War, yeah.
So what happens in the Time War?
The quick explanation, it's a giant war between... So the Time Lords have their sort of arch nemesis race, which is the Daleks.
Exterminate!
Yeah, they're little aliens in a giant robot suit that's built to destroy things. And
I see them at Comic-Cons all the time.
It's a pretty popular cosplay because...
It's like R2-D2 on steroids with like a turret gun.
Yeah. It's like a death beam, and they have a toilet plunger or something.
Yeah. They have like
it's kind of, they can't change the original design, and at the time, they didn't have a lot to throw onto the prop.
It's fine. But anyway.
Okay, so it's this alien race. They're genetically bred to only feel like anger and hate. They're just very destructive. And there's this giant war between the Time Lords and the Daleks, and basically to end it, the War Doctor, as they called him, steals a Time Lord weapon that basically wipes them all out, and at least that's how it's explained until the 50th anniversary special, where they brought in the War Doctor, and they kind of explained that this device didn't actually just wipe them all out; it kind of trapped them in some alternate dimension, kind of thing. Spoilers
for Day of the Doctor.
Yeah, a little bit. That's the sort of quick explanation of it.
That was the quick explanation?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. See what I mean, guys? Doctor Who's complicated.
It's a very complicated storylines. But basically, that kind of it also kind of served to give motivation to the new Doctor. He's like, oh, hey, the rest of the Time Lords aren't actually completely dead. I can still go looking for them.
So that's this establishes, like you mentioned, with the 9th Doctor in the Revival series, where he believes he's killed them all, and so for most of New Who, I guess there's this understanding or this assumption that the Time Lords are dead. So he goes from being part of this race of aliens where he's just sort of talking to them. He's just kind of like a guy, I guess, traveling around and touching base with his colleagues. To all of a sudden, he is this Superman figure. He's the last of his kind. He is alone in the universe. And I'm guessing that probably had a lot of impact on the show.
Yeah, where he was like, he's the last of his kind. There was a couple episode arc with the 10th Doctor where they brought back the other Time Lords, but it was kind of, he was fighting against the Master, And in that storyline, they were kind of portrayed as this race that needed to stay away because they were going to like end up destroying the entire universe, trying to defeat their enemies.
So that's kind of like at the end of my list of differences between New Who and Classic Who. Is there anything that we haven't mentioned that, again, I know you haven't seen a lot of Classic Who, but is there anything that you would like to bring up that's a key difference that we haven't mentioned yet?
I don't know. I think we covered most of the big ones.
Okay, perfect. So this obviously isn't meant to be a full-on introduction to Doctor Who. We obviously had to explain some stuff for people as we were going along here. So if you've never watched Doctor Who before, I hope you guys can walk away from this episode with like the knowledge that there's these kind of two different generations of Doctor Who. And based on what we've said, maybe you'll have a better sense of what version you'll like better. Personally, for myself, I've watched Day of the Doctor, and I've watched one episode of the 11th Doctor show, and maybe if I had more time to invest in nerd culture, I would sit down and actually try and get into the show. But I just found it very complicated, and it has like this weird kind of British humor and this kind of like quirky style in how it's presented and how the characters act that it's just, I don't know, a little cerebral for me to try and get into. But having said that, if I had to choose between Classic Who and New Who, I'd probably go with New Who.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to, well, modern storytelling, modern effects.
Yeah, like I said, the effects don't bother me that much. I would just have a good time with the stuff. But obviously, not to throw Classic Who fans under the bus, because if it wasn't for Classic Who, there would no no New Who.
That's true. We can't just discount it, but
so there you go.
They do have a lot more complicated storylines now.
So the series is currently on the 13th Doctor, and I don't know, is there going to be another season for the 13th Doctor?
I think so. I haven't heard anything about it recently, though. It's one of these shows that there's a lot of time between series.
So there you go. If you've never checked out Doctor Who before, maybe this is the time for you to start. If you are a Whovian or a Doctor Who fan that doesn't feel comfortable being called a Whovian, maybe this has been interesting for you to kind of compare the two generations. And if you're somewhere in the middle, hopefully you've enjoyed this conversation as well.
So anyways, thank you so much for having me, Average Joe. It's been a blast being on this podcast, getting to...
Well, don't say goodbye yet. I'm going to get all teared up. We got to tell people where they can find the show.
Okay. Yeah. So if you want to hear our lovely voices again, our podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, SoundCloud, pretty much wherever you get your podcasts from.
We're on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, so you can listen to our episodes as basically like a video. We're not a video podcast, but you can certainly listen to the audio on YouTube. You can subscribe to the channel there. You can ring that bell to join the notification squad, because that's how YouTube will alert you to our episodes being uploaded. And if you are, subscribing on Apple Podcasts or Google Play or those other ones, you can certainly subscribe to those podcasts as well on there.
The Bat Jar Podcast also has a Facebook page where you can share our podcasts with your friends, get more people listening, hopefully.
Yeah, because we want everyone to join us inside the Tardis. Oh, I mean, in the Bat Jar. Maybe the Bat Jar. Could the Bat Jar be a Tardis?
Well, TARDISes have what they call a chameleon circuit, so it can disguise itself as anything. It's meant to camouflage in the year.
So the Bat Jar could be a Tardis and I just don't know it yet?
You could fit a lot of cookies in a TARDIS cookie jar.
Okay. Very interesting. And you do work in social media with computers, so you can explain the Facebook algorithm. Why is it important for people to like our posts?
Well, basically, when you're commenting, the Facebook algorithm sees there's a lot more activity on it and kind of promotes it a bit more.
So in other words, if you like our post, if you share our post on your own wall, or even if you comment on one of our posts, it'll then show up in the news feeds of people that you're friends with, and they will find this show. And if you want more people to join us inside this Bat Jar that may be a TARDIS, sharing our posts or commenting on our posts actually helps with that a lot.
Well, with your current listeners, I believe the Bat Jar would be a TARDIS, because otherwise y'all wouldn't fit inside of it.
And also, it'd be nice if you wrote us some reviews in your favorite podcasting service of choice, because the way the algorithms work for all these podcasting services is that the more reviews you have and the more ratings you have, it kind of moves you up the ranking faster. So if there's anybody who found this podcast just by, searching random subjects in their podcasting app of choice, welcome. Please stay, subscribe, and, rate our show so that more people can find us like yourself. All right, now it's time for me to thank Pumice for being on the show with us today. This conversation about Doctor Who and all his timey-wimey stuff would not have been nearly as fun without you. So thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm afraid I'm not the greatest replacement for Dr. What, but I did my best.
So there you go. If you guys want to hear Pumice again, please send us mail. Let us know that you want to hear him again. There are subjects that you know a lot about other than Doctor Who, so I'm sure when Arrow has its final episode, maybe that'll be a time to bring you back and
we could do that.
Do like an Arrow retrospective to make me cry.
Or for those of you who are Adventure Time fans, I have an approximate knowledge of many things.
Okay, so
you don't get that, do you?
Right. Okay. Sorry, I'm forgetting the most important part of the show. We need to go into the bat jar and find out what we're going to talk about next time.
So you want me to hop in there?
Yeah. So feel free to bring the bat jar close to your microphone so people can tell you're actually looking in it.
It's so deep in here.
But don't actually look at the papers. You got it, because it's cheating. Because then you know what they are. So really ruffle it about. There you go. Okay. And I put the jar down because we understand that you're in there. All right. You got a topic.
Okay. Here's my topic. So the next topic will be the best Disney movie based on a ride.
Oh, man.
Was there more of those than just Pirates of the Caribbean?
Oh, yeah. There's a bunch of them.
Huh.
And there's one coming out next year, actually, called Jungle Cruise.
Interesting. You learn something new every day.
Yeah. So there you go. Come back to the Bad Char podcast next week when we talk about the best Disney movies based on a ride.
Now, are you talking about just the first movie or whether or not they made it into a series that kind of went downhill?
Yeah, we'll figure that out next week.
We'll talk more.
But until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Pumice.
Catch you on the flip side.
Use me to scrub your feet.